Hi, everybody. We're super excited that you could join us today. I'm Shireen, and we have Maggie with us, and we have Asya with us. Unfortunately, Laila was not able to join us today because of technical difficulties. And oh, wait.
Looks like she just did.
Just kidding. Okay, so we do have Laila with us. That's awesome. So we have Laila and Maggie with us. Cool.
Wonderful.
Well, we'll take what we can get. Audio is great. So we have Laila and Maggie here from the Gaza Kitchen cookbook, which I have the first edition from almost 10 years ago, and it's well marked, and it's one of the books I really like exploring. Is this the new one?
No, this is the second edition.
Oh, that's the second one. That's the one in the middle.
Out, but I don't even have it yet. Is that
I've ordered mine. I think it's waiting for me in the States. So we're really excited to have Laila and Maggie here. Laila is a Palestinian American journalist, food advocate, and public speaker. She's the author of a number of books and co-editor of Gazan Salad from 2015. Through her work as a writer, storyteller, and culinary documentarian, she provides much needed insight into the Palestinian experience. She was born in Kuwait to Gaza Palestinian parents and currently lives with her family in Maryland. And Maggie is an independent writer, researcher, translator, and social activist. She works in various media, writing, video, participatory research, and recording the daily practices of ordinary people as a way to understand political and social realities in the Mediterranean region. Her recent work is centered on farm practices and agro-food systems, and she lives with her family in rural Spain, which totally just sounds like the dream to me. I'm Shireen. I am from Extinction Rebellion, Wordsmiths. We're the writing group for XR. And we help out with any writing that XR rebels might need, anything from writing guides to helping out with architecture competition submissions. We work on our own projects like informational leaflets for people during rebellion. We're working on a solar punk story showcase. We'll put the link in later if you guys want to join with that. And hopefully a forthcoming gardening handbook, which brings activism to gardening and gardening to activism. Extinction Rebellion is a global movement that aims to put pressure on governments to act now to address the climate and ecological emergency using nonviolent civil disobedience, informational campaigns, and other events. So, and we have Asya here. Asya, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi there, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Asya. I'm Indian by background, but like Shireen, I'm a much later addition to XR Wordsmiths. Really lovely little writing group. I'm also a member of XR Muslims, and I'm a member of my local group XR Leicester, which is in the East Midlands of the UK. So I'm really privileged to be cooking a Gazan vegan dish with you all.
So I think
So the format of this event, first of all, thank you so much for inviting us. Laila, we'll see what her degree of participation is. Right now, Laila, we can see you and it's all good. So Laila will be with us as much as she can. She's
really? You guys still can't see me?
Yeah, we see you fine. We see you great.
Oh, you do? I thought you said you can't see me. Okay, that's because I'm inside, right next to the Wi-Fi router. So
it works. Anyway, the format for today's talk, it's a cook along, as I imagine you know. We are going to be making two fairly simple dishes. One is the sort of classic standard Gazan salad, very simple. It's a pounded salad, and the other is a very simple sort of vegetable. It's called samak al-arbala, which means a widow's dish. So it's basically vegetables treated in the way that you might treat a fish. So it's a poor man or a widow's version of how fish would be cooked, both entirely vegan. And we're going to try to be cooking and talking at the same time. And we don't have a lot of experience with this as a format, online, talking, cooking all at the same time. So just stick with us and be patient. And don't hesitate. We prefer for this to be more a conversation than anything else, to the extent possible, and given all the technological intermediaries, we would like to create this as an atmosphere sitting around the kitchen together. And inshallah, someday we'll all sit around a kitchen table together and have a proper sitting around a kitchen table conversation. But in the meantime, we do the best that we can with what we have. And but interrupt us, ask questions, send questions to the chat. Let's try to make this as much a dialogue and a conversation as possible, because we don't know what you're interested in, what you know about. This project, the very idea of the Gaza Kitchen cookbook sort of can go in lots of different directions. Like we can end up talking about Palestine and Palestinian history. We can end up talking about sort of research and writing strategies for how to talk about contentious political topics from a different angle that allows them to enter the mainstream, sort of as a strategic way of thinking about political intervention. We can end up talking about sort of more like broader colonialism and food sovereignty issues. Like we can kind of go lots of different directions here, and we'd love to be able to respond to the audience and what you find more interesting. So please don't hesitate to ask questions and throw things out. Laila, do you want to say anything by way of introduction?
Sure. These are two of my, favorite summertime light, supper type dishes. And, I myself, I'm not vegetarian or vegan, but eat very little meat. So I sort of lean towards these types of dishes. And especially in the heat of the summer, as I'm reminded where I am right now in Turkey, I'm in Cappadocia, which is why I don't have a good internet connection or access to my own kitchen. But in this kind of dry heat, I'm reminded why I like those types of dishes. And I'm also reminded, as I've been traveling around Turkey, that it shares a lot in common. And the use of the clay pot cookery, which the degga, one of the salad that we're about to make, exemplifies, is also very common where I am here. So I keep thinking, man, if I had planned this better, there's so many clay pots I could have used. In fact, I have one in my room right now. I could have just gotten it, and there's dill everywhere. Degga and Palestinian cuisine, like Gaza specifically, uses a lot of fresh dill and dill seed. And the only other like nearby country that I know that does that is Turkey. In fact, all of my other Palestinian in-laws that I was meeting up with in Turkey kept like giving me quizzical looks when I was buying bunches of dill to make this salad for them with. And they were like, what do you use this for? We've never heard of it before. They confused it with fennel. And I kept insisting it wasn't fennel. And they're like, no, it's fennel. I'm like, no, it's not fennel. So anyway, this is the long and short of this is I love these dishes. They have so many great flavors. They're fantastic, in the heat of the summer. The ingredients are widely available. If you can't find fresh dill, use dill seeds and vice versa. If you don't have garlic or you don't like it, it can also be made with onions. It's sort of, people are split 50-50 on whether it should be made with onions or garlic. And they have very strong feelings about that. So degga is ideally made with like super ripe summer tomatoes, the ones that you would maybe throw away, or that I've seen them throw away in the West, at least. So get the juiciest tomatoes you can find. It comes together like in literally a matter of minutes. You don't have a mortar and pestle. It's supposed to ideally be made in a zibdiya, which I'm not sure if Maggie has one or not.
I have.
I can't
for all these years. Father's house, and the best thing he has is a large mortar and pestle. But we're going to make it work. It's not a zibdiya, which would be very similar, but made of like a rough red clay, characteristic in Gaza. But we're just going to have to make do with.
I as I've been traveling around here, I can't help but wonder. I think it could easily be made at any potter because,
of course,
like it's just a meaning, like But anyway, yeah, any mortar and pestle will do. And I always tell people, honestly, if you don't have a mortar and pestle, I always say don't use a food processor. I feel very strongly about this. Just use like a large knife, and honestly, worst comes to worst, use your hands and just like mash the tomatoes, because that's how easily this comes together. You're just kind of mashing the garlic or the onion with some salt for friction. You're adding the hot chili peppers.
Let's actually do this. Yeah, that's a pause because let's.
Okay.
So we're making, like I said, two dishes. One is the characteristic Gazan salad that's called daga, or dagat Gaza, or salat ghazawi. And in this version, you could do it, as Laila mentioned, depending sort of geographically which part of Gaza you're from. Gaza is very...
I was about to say, I can't see your head.
Yeah.
Now I can.
Gaza, as you know, I'm sure, or anyone can look at a map and see, the present day Gaza Strip is minuscule. And yet because of the sort of historic geographical differences, and also the fact that Gaza has received the influx of refugees from all around, especially the southern part of Palestine, you get incredible diversity of cuisine within this teeny tiny little strip of territory. And for us, one of the most interesting things about doing our research was being able to sort of trace these different heritages that accumulate in Gaza. So one of the many sort of dividing lines in terms of cuisine is some folks believe that salads like this should include onions, and others believe they should be based on garlic. Arbitrarily today, I'm going to do this with onions because the other dish has a lot of garlic, and just to, in case anyone's garlic averse, we don't want to, totally disappoint them with both dishes. So I'm going to put some chopped chopped onion, very finely chopped onion, into this mortar and pestle, which, as Laila said, in Gaza would be a locally made red clay vessel. And I'm going to dump some salt in in order to provide friction for grinding it. This is a good trick. Garlic, if people are averse to the strong, intense, spicy taste of raw garlic, a good trick is to beat it to a cream. Onion, you are not going to get to a cream, but garlic, if you really work at it with a little salt and you pound at it shamelessly, you can get it to be creamy, and then magically it's that spicy quality that then sticks in your mouth for the rest of the day goes away. So indeed, Gazan cuisine uses a huge amount of garlic, but it doesn't have that garlic spiciness because it's been pounded first. That's worth trying. We'll do that in the second dish. But I'm going to pound it until my onions, or garlic if you're using it, garlic is almost like a creamy paste, and the onions are just kind of translucent and squashed looking, right? And then to that, I'm going to add some green chili peppers. The other key ingredient that's characteristic of Gazan food. Anyone who's familiar with Middle Eastern food more broadly knows that in Lebanon and Syria, people in general are very averse to hot spice. Gaza forms part of a continuum of those other regions in terms of cooking techniques and cuisine generally, but they add a lot of spicy, hot, red and green peppers. So
Maggie, I'm gonna pretend I'm an audience member and say, how roughly are you chopping the peppers, and what type of green pepper should you be using?
Why don't you explain that, Laila, since you're the co-worker?
So no, can you show us how it looks so far?
I used a serrano pepper because that's what I could find here. It's not totally ideal, but it does the trick. When I'm back home,
I think that works. That works well. Yeah,
it works okay. I've cut them into little pieces of, I don't know, a centimeter by a half a centimeter, but it doesn't really matter. They should be smallish pieces. But in any case, I'm going to crush the bejesus out of them. So,
right. Yeah. So really, any kind, depending on where everyone lives, the ones to avoid are the tiny little, bird's eye chili type peppers. That's not really the ideal pepper for this, but more of the finger.
They should be hot, but not so hot that just touching them is painful. They should be in that in that middle hotness ground.
Yeah, here I know I'm in Turkey now, and the Turkish hot green peppers work really well as well.
Those are great. Those are fantastic.
That's probably the closest thing that I've had on to the Gaza peppers. But yeah, you want them to be green, not red. My dad used to always say this salad should be more green than it should be red, meaning you really want the ratio of chili peppers to tomatoes to be more like 2 to 1. But again, it depends on your tolerance. I have made this, by the way, for people who are heat intolerant without hot chilies. It's not really ideal, but it can be done. Yeah, my grandmother used to always call the salad the centerpiece of the Palestinian table. And it's just something that's kind of omnipresent. It should always be there, you know, at suppers, at any kind of dinner. It's usually accompanies stews, like tomato-based stews like tabikh, or seafood dishes. I'm seeing somebody's raising their hand. Let me just go and check on that. So yeah, really this thing comes together super quickly. It's also very fun for kids to do this, because you can really, it's just very hands-on, and for anybody who just wants some culinary therapy, it's a great way to get out your aggressions. Yeah.
Its
So
name dagat is the also means just pounded. So the
Right.
idea is that it's beaten, it's pounded. The verb dagat is the same one that they use to describe the bombings in Gaza. So it's there's a lot of sort of wordplay around the pounded Gazan
Right.
salad.
Right.
Now,
So someone is asking how much garlic and chili to include. So if you're making like a medium-sized, you know, say a quantity for maybe 3 to 4 people, maybe like 2 to 3 small garlic cloves, and I would say 2 to 3 chili peppers, something like that.
really feel free to adapt according to your audience, because
Right.
like I'm making this for my family. We will eat this later for dinner here, and nobody likes it either very hot or very garlicky. So I'm like toning it down substantially relative to
Right.
what I would make for myself. So
And 1 small onion if you're not using
depending
garlic,
on
I
the
would say.
kind of chilies you have, how hot they are. So you just need to
Exactly.
understand your audience and your ingredients. But yeah, what Laila said is good orientation. Once you've got the peppers and the either onion or garlic really well mashed, like really sort of all the pulp broken out, so it's kind of a slightly lumpy mush, then you can add about a 1/4 cup of chopped up dill. So you take dill, you pick out the thick stems, like remove the thick stems, because otherwise they'll just be floating around there. They're a little bitter. Take only the sort of feathery bit, chop that finely, and then drop it in the mortar or the vidilla.
So Maggie, I'm going to stop you and ask a question here, because I've noticed, I don't know if you've noticed this, but you can keep going. You don't have to stop. But do you notice when you pound the dill in the beginning rather than stir it in chopped at the end, does it like become bitter?
I have not found that, but
okay. I noticed for some reason when I pound it, it seems to get a little bitter. I don't know why. Versus if I usually what I do is okay.
If you include the stems, it gets bitter, but if you
got it, maybe that's what I was doing then. Yeah, I usually chop mine and stir it in. And a note for everybody who's watching: if you don't have fresh dill or it's not the season or whatever, this can also be made with dill seeds. It looks like you're punching me or something. Now I can't see it. Oh, you're just aiming
I'm
at
just showing that I'm now putting in the tomatoes.
Okay, so growing up, for example, I grew up largely in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, and we would summer in Gaza, and we didn't have access to fresh dill. So I remember always my mom making this with dill seeds that we would get through this kind of clandestine, a network of travelers, of which there were very few, going to Gaza and coming back to the Gulf. And we would obtain the dill seeds and we would grind them. Ah, thank you. Just been handed some fresh walnuts, so that was very kind. So what we would do is grind the dill seeds in a circular motion with some salt for friction until you really begin to smell those oils, and they've just kind of achieved a rough grind. And then we would just proceed with the recipe: add garlic or onion, add chili peppers, etc., and then just omit the fresh dill. So it can also be made that way with equally delicious results. And as you can see, it gets to this nice, like what we call a salsa-like consistency. Everything's just mashed and juicy and delicious and beautiful.
As Laila said before, the end result should be more green than red, as you can see, or maybe you can't. I've been mashing. I put in the very juicy tomatoes, and then have been just sort of mashing them in with the other already mashed stuff. And in the end, we have a sort of a thick, chunky, dense salad. To this, we will then, I will check for salt because I think I added plenty of salt. Yep, for the mashing. I was already putting plenty of salt from what I put in there.
Now, some people at this point add a squeeze of lemon juice and some people don't. I like the tang of the lemon juice, but it's optional. And you kind of give everything a stir.
Right.
I have
And
a quick
then-
question.
Please.
Clean the sides of the bowl and then top it generously with oil. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. My question is, my pestle and mortar is really tiny. So
Yeah.
am I okay to chop my dill finely?
Yes. So actually, that's
Yes.
what I do. I don't like to pound mine. It's just a
Okay.
matter of preference. I like to chop mine finely and stir it
Sure.
in. And
Yeah.
then at this point, feel free to, it's usually served in the bowl. Like everything is kind of mixed together. At the
Yeah.
end, the edges of the bowls are cleaned. You can take either your finger or a wet paper towel and just kind of go around the edges of the bowl to clean it after you've mixed everything.
Sure.
And then you drizzle a generous amount of olive oil on top. And it's usually served in the mortar and pestle. But if yours is small, feel free to transfer it to a shallow bowl
Yeah.
and then do the same thing. Top it with olive oil.
And sorry, if you could just repeat how much dill, I forgot.
Yeah. So let me see the quantity of salad that you made.
I've
it's
got that much. I've got that much onion and garlic mashed up. Onion, garlic, and chili.
Okay. So you need to add your tomatoes, right?
Yeah, I've still got to chop my tomatoes, but
Yeah.
is this much
So I
dill?
would do, that's a lot. So I would just do maybe half of that or a fourth without the stems. Because
Yeah,
I
I'll
tend to
trim
find
stems. I'll
too
trim
much
stems,
dill.
yeah.
Yeah, I tend to find if you overwhelm it with dill, it does get a little bitter. So
Sure. Yeah, I'll trim the stems away.
Question about the sort of the process of the book. So the first edition came out in 2012 and this new one has just come out now, so like 9 years later. And I'm wondering, like, has there been an evolution in, well, first, what can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of the book and then also how it's been received? Because just thinking about like Palestine activism over the last decade and mainstream discourse about Palestine, it's changed so much. And so just sort of what your experience has been with that.
How about this? I think we need to do a check-in because on the one hand, I would absolutely love to indeed prefer to talk about what you're asking, Shireen, but also in principle, we're making a whole other dish and I'm seeing that we're already at halfway through our allotted time. So either, and it seems to me that the narrating what we're doing while we cook sort of precludes talking very much about the book and the sort of politics of it. So how does everybody feel about leaving the salad that we've made done, skipping the making of the eggplant dish and just talking from here on out? Or should we try to continue talking and cooking? Does anyone want to weigh in on that? Talk and cook? Okay. All right, we'll try it. All right, as for your question,
oh, whoops, I was just talking with that. I was saying, yeah, I would say go ahead and cook. And I'm happy to, since I'm not cooking, I'm happy to take over some of that.
Some of the talking. Okay, then I'm going to just, before we start talking, I just want to start frying the eggplant so that it has time, we have time to do all of this. So just, I've taken an eggplant, I've peeled it in strips so that it's like a zebra, like one strip yes, one strip no. I've laid it out on a plate with some salt in order for the bitter juices of the eggplant to rise out. I'm now going to fill a small pan with olive oil and fry this eggplant in there. So Laila, maybe while I'm doing that, you want to start talking about the strategy of the book and what things were like in 2010?
Yeah, let me just quickly say two things to catch people up to speed. Is everyone okay on the salad? After you add that last squeeze of lemon juice and you have everything mixed in, dill, tomatoes, etc., you mix everything together, either clean your bowl and serve it in there and top it with a generous glug of olive oil or transfer it to a bowl and top with olive oil. So if everyone is okay on that, I will move on to the eggplant. And somebody was asking, I'm just checking here really quickly, how long do you keep it in salt? Okay, so I like to keep it about 10 to 15 minutes, but I have kept it for less. And I should say that it, depending on the variety of eggplant, I've also not needed to salt at all. So in the US, we have several varieties available to us. Sometimes I use Japanese eggplants, which are sort of this long, sweet variety. I have them growing in my garden right now as well. And I don't need to salt those at all, by way of example. So it really does depend on where you live. I've salted them for less. Sometimes I even soak them in a salty sort of bath. That works too, and that's quicker, right? And one final thing on the eggplant slash aubergines, is it aubergines or aubergines? I don't know. Is that I actually sometimes don't fry them. I slather them with olive oil, and I either grill them or put them in a panini press. That works just as well too. So you can choose what you want to do. So that's on the eggplants. Now, in terms of the book, the question was how it's evolved, or how is sort of the discourse changed, or what this.
I think it's interesting to talk about the moment when we started this. At the moment when we initiated this project was very soon after the truly hideous bombings in 2008, 2009. We started to talk about sort of other ways of talking about Gaza. How do we approach this in a way that doesn't sort of run into the total impasse that surrounds any conversation, especially in the United States, about Palestine generally and Gaza specifically. And since both of us sort of love food and had this intuition that food is never just food, food is a sort of way that you can talk about everything that goes into the food. Food represents the economy, food represents ecological issues, food represents heritage and culture and traditions. It represents sort of sociological patterns of who cooks, who learns to cook from whom, how are families structured. Food, if you play it right, can talk about almost everything, and yet food is this sort of very amicable, friendly face. Everybody loves to talk about food. It seemed to us a sort of a backdoor for talking about everything that was going on in Gaza, and along the way also highlighting this amazing cuisine that no one had ever documented before. But this was taking place in the moment in 2010 when we did the field work. It was politically basically impossible in the United States to really, or it was only just burgeoningly possible to really have a conversation about Palestine. Now I need to turn my eggplants. Continue.
I'll take over while she's doing that. Yeah, check on your eggplants. They should be either frying or grilling. You can do that in the oven or in a panini press. They'll get done pretty quickly. Yeah, so at the time, it was like, we usually say the book was, people received it with a kind of cognitive dissonance, like, the cookbook or the food world viewed it with a kind of, like puzzled sort of, why are you writing about, why are you sort of poisoning this with politics, right? And people who were, on the political side, or, what we would otherwise term allies, were kind of like, this is a very frivolous thing to be doing, or sort of a cruel way to be talking about Gaza at this time. So it sort of fell between the cracks, but at the same time, we noticed it was received incredibly well, both in Gaza, most importantly. People totally understood and got what this was about, that it was about much more than food. And we felt it filled a gap or a void, and it provided a way for people to be able to speak about Gaza specifically and Palestine at large and the Palestinian struggle in a way that they hadn't been able to do before, without trivializing it. Like we were putting it all out there on the plate, as it were, right? And so, and then we were happy to discover that subsequent to that, both this approach and writing about Palestinian food it like seemed to open like doors for people, or like a floodgate, and people were like, aha, we can do this, right? And that in and of itself was fantastic, because part of our goal was to codify what I felt like personally as a Palestinian from Gaza who had grown up in diaspora was kind of a dying knowledge, right? Like almost disinherited, as it were. And I sensed there was a lot of these dishes people didn't know about, or that were disappearing, or that weren't ever recorded. So that part was important to me. But we were also keen to highlight, and profile stories, most importantly, and be able to talk about all these really complicated issues in Gaza that we felt was like a key to understanding the situation, and in a very dignified and human way that it wasn't being talked about before.
Not to interrupt you, Laila, but I just want to show a golden eggplant.
Beautiful.
This is an aubergine. I just pulled it out of the frying oil. It should be about this degree of fried. I will now lie on a paper towel that will absorb some of the extra grease.
It sounds like you're conducting a surgery.
Something like that.
Sorry, I get really, really silly at night. But this reminds me of one of my favorite childhood memories is visiting Gaza, going to the beach, and after swimming, going to any number of the beachside kiosks and eating a fried eggplant and potato sandwich slathered with, a pounded chili pepper and garlic dressing. So, which is essentially what we're making, but without the bread, right? So, but they're just like something about it. The combination is just totally like addictive, tantalizing, etc. I'm just looking here at the questions.
Okay, next batch of.
Yeah.
So when we did the field work, it was 2010, and that was the sort of the maximum height of the siege. The siege is still going on in Gaza, but at that moment, just to orient those who are maybe not as familiar with the situation in Gaza, the siege Gaza is completely surrounded on its southern border by Egypt, and on all of its others, its eastern and northern border by the state of Israel, and all access to the strip is completely controlled and limited by the sort of alliance between Egypt and Israel, which obviously with the revolution in Egypt, there have been various different moments in that relationship, but at all times there's been a total control over access for people, but also for goods, for products entering and exiting the strip. In 2010, at the time that we did the field research for this, the blockade was at its most extreme moment. So weekly, the Israeli authorities would issue a list of what things were allowed to enter Gaza. It was totally surreal. It was absolutely bizarre, the arbitrariness of what was allowed and what was prohibited into Gaza. With a little more research, we discovered that it basically reflected agricultural overflow coming out of Israel. So it was a form of agricultural dumping to those things that were, those products that were saturated in the Israeli market would be dumped in Gaza, where they really had very little alternative but to buy them. So, and then Gazan farmers were busy producing. They had been trained by agricultural extension officers for decades to produce for export highly delicate and sort of high value added products like strawberries, for example, aimed for an export market. But and also, of course, highly demanding in terms of irrigation, highly demanding in terms of pesticide consumption if they're grown in a conventional way, highly demanding in terms of labor. And then all of these strawberries at that point were not allowed to exit through the passes out of Gaza into Israel, where they would then go into the international market. And so they were just sort of rotting in the sun, carnations, strawberries. So this sort of heartbreaking situation in which a territory that basically is on the brink of a total water crisis, dumping all of this water into growing high value added crops that they then try to export for cash, and they end up just sort of sitting in the sun and rotting. So the degree of the sort of insult and humiliation, in addition to bad politics and unsustainability that was happening at the borders and expressed through food and agriculture, at that particular moment was really shocking. It continues to be, but it has modulated a bit since 2010 when we did the field research. Sorry, I have to turn my eggplants.
Yeah, I'll also add that at that time, it was always a struggle for me personally as a Palestinian from Gaza who had worked there for a while, who wrote about it for a long time, to be able to like convey the reality of what was happening in as nuanced and as, real a way as possible. Like people just either pitied Gaza, like poor Gaza, it's always being bombed, so Gaza, we've said over and over, it's sort of uniquely both victim and aggressor, right? Or it was Gaza, like, full of terrorists, et cetera, et cetera. And at that time in 2010, when we were doing the field research, it was commonly misunderstood. The idea of the blockade and what it aimed to achieve and what it still aims to achieve, because it's ongoing, was commonly misunderstood and used also as a form of propaganda to try to convince people that everything was fine, right? So often it was made to be a blockade that was strictly about availability of foodstuffs, right? Like, oh, the blockade means they're not allowing food into Gaza. And then people would take pictures and say, but look, there's like Snickers bars and chips in Gaza and ketchup. So what's the problem, right? And so, this was a critical point at which being able to look at the situation from the angle of food was imperative, to explaining that it was about accessibility, not about availability of foods, right? That the blockade, had, basically gotten people to a point where they were completely impoverished, most of them, many of them, and unable to, had no purchasing power, unable to access and purchase the items that they would have traditionally been able to buy and utilize in their, foods in their. So that year was critical to understanding that kind of paradigm or this paradigm shift. And that continues to be the case, that this is a blockade or a siege ongoing that is about essentially people's access, not only to foods, but to basic rights, freedoms, being able to fish freely, to farm freely, to access universities freely, to move freely. These things are still being restricted by the blockade. And that's something we aim to highlight, in the book as well.
Just to add what's going on over here in Foodland, I slightly burned those eggplants because I got carried away talking about the blockade, but it's okay, they're fine. And now I am adding to the same frying oil. I've pulled out all my eggplant slices. I'm now adding potato slices of approximately the same thickness as the aubergine slices. It's just a peeled ordinary potato cut into slices, and I'm now frying them. And they too will soon burn. So Laila, take it away.
You want me to continue on that thread? Yeah. And so basically, I remember what I was going to say. It was the case then, and it continues to be the case till this day, that the stated goals of the blockade on Gaza are no development, no prosperity, no humanitarian crisis. And these are goals that were, stated goals of the Israeli government that were leaked at the time in a document. And the idea was that always keep Gaza and its people teetering on the edge of collapse, right? So provide an intravenous drip of relief to the people. Never deprive them so much that it creates an all-out humanitarian disaster that would cause the media to, cry foul or whatever, but always deprive them enough that they are being, that they are unable to prosper or develop and only able to survive, right? Not thrive. And this continues to be the case till this day. Somebody was asking about the potatoes. I'm saying here, yes, you do either fry or again, you can also oven roast them depending on your preference. But yes, again, I like to just slather mine in oil and like oven roast them. I find they have a nice crunch, but fried is also great. So, and then once you do both of that, we're gonna dress them with that pounded chili, garlic, and lemon dressing.
Which we still have to make.
We could go ahead and start making that if you're frying your potatoes. All we're gonna do is you're gonna take a mortar and pestle or anything. You could use a board in an oven, mash some garlic, 2 or 3 cloves or so with heavy pinch of salt, or pour the salt in your hand as Maggie's doing. And then just, again, mashed with a dull, wide blade, or pound in a mortar and pestle. And you just want to crush that garlic down until it's nice and creamy. Add maybe 2 chili peppers that have been previously chopped. Mash those as well. And then douse the whole thing with the juice of, either 1 big or maybe 2 small to medium lemons. And then just mix it all together. That's the basic, what they call degget filfil lemon, right? So the chili, garlic, and lemon dressing in Gaza, that is a basic accompaniment to a lot of different dishes. One of them being this, others being rice dishes. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna basically take the eggplant, tear it apart with your hands. Sorry. And that, hello, did I lose everybody? We're just gonna take the eggplant, tear it apart with your hands, put it in a platter, put the potatoes, arrange the potatoes around it, and then just pour that dressing on top. Very simple, very satisfying. It's usually eaten with kmaj, Arabic bread. Any kind of flat bread will do. I just want to see if there's any questions here.
Oh yeah, I forgot. I got it.
Yusuf.
To pick back up,
It says here, yeah. So it is true. David was asking questions about the Kogat, the Israeli body that governs, entrance and exit from Gaza, does have a system by which they calculate exactly how many calories. And they do this again. The idea is to be able to then say to anyone that's pointing a finger, like, aha, you see, we're providing exactly what's needed. So you can't say that we're depriving them of food, which is why I always say it's important to phrase things. The framework should be one of, access, not availability of foodstuffs, right? And rights rather than
but also
rather
it's
than
important to keep in mind that the mode of calculation is in terms of calories, and they're
of
using
course.
World Health Organization criteria for what are the calories that a human needs to survive in an emergency situation. So these are caloric counts that are conceived for moments of earthquakes, disasters, sudden evacuations. And we're talking about a population that has been living on these rations for 70 years. So it's a very
Right. Many.
I can't remember the word in English, but it's a deceptive.
Many an aid worker I've spoken to has. Yeah, many aid workers I've spoken to have emphasized how there are now incredibly high rates of iron deficiency, anemia, and a lack of nutritional balance in the diet, especially amongst children, because of this long-term dependence on handouts and rations and the kinds of things that people are now able to afford, preclude a lot of the sort of indigenous, sort of ingredients and items that would have been more native to the cuisine. So when I last went to Gaza about 1.5 years ago with the World Food Program, it was very evident to me how most people were no longer able to purchase things like olive oil, tahina, sesame seed paste, etc. They would only buy them in a unit's rations for a particular dish, to drizzle on top. And they were no longer making things in the way that they were. And this was a trend we noticed in 2010, but I felt like it had come full circle when I visited 1.5 years ago. I just do want to quickly switch gears because somebody was asking about the eggplants / aubergines. And yes, the idea in this, again, it's more like aesthetics. You don't have to do it, but is that you take the eggplant and you kind of just tear it apart with your hands, or is macerate the right word? I don't know. I'm trying to think. But when we saw it being made, they would just kind of take it and like cut it into sort of strips or with their hand. And maybe Maggie, you can demonstrate.
Just rip it.
Just rip it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We had such a hard time thinking of the best title for this dish, because it makes, like, in Arabic, it's imfassah bitinjan, which is, or we're making arma, which is similar, right? Or are we doing that, or samak al-armla, which is the same, right? Essentially.
Yeah, it's the same.
But it just means like completely overwhelmed or defeated, or Huh?
The good word would be rent. I didn't think of that at the time, but
Rent?
yeah, I mean, not like what you pay to stay in your house, but rent, like the rending of garments, like the.
Okay. Yes, exactly. But I'm not really sure why, but it's just maybe because you don't want a huge chunk of like piece of eggplant in your mouth. Rend. Okay, someone said connected me. Yeah. It's the same word is used for salted fish. That's popular around Easter. Sikh. So yeah.
So, sorry, I'm having a hard time multitasking.
Do you want to, Maggie, maybe point the camera down to the plate and show them what it's looking like now?
Well, it's the plate itself is still by the frying pan.
Oh, it's not put together yet.
At the moment, yeah, I haven't put it together. Right now, what we have
Okay.
are fried eggplants and some fried potatoes, and more potatoes coming off at the moment, and then I'm gonna be done with this frying moment.
Yeah, someone is asking about the salt. Frankly, I sometimes just leave it on and then I don't add salt later. Or if you put a lot, then you could just, as someone said, with a paper towel kind of. Sometimes you can, if you're salt sensitive or have high blood pressure, or whatever, you can also rinse it off. My mother used to do that. So it just depends, But usually when you dab it with to get rid of the excess moisture with a paper towel, that kind of gets rid of the salt.
I'm squeezing some lemons. I will add those to the garlic and chili pepper, which I have here mashed in order to make the dressing for the eggplants and the potatoes. But what I wanted to say was that for me, I mean, I'm not from Gaza. My family's not from Gaza. So the Gazan context was relatively new to me, but I think that anyone that's working in issues of food sovereignty or peasant movements or land movements or whatever will recognize the situation, or also like food deserts and urban food access issues, all of these kind of issues. I think part of what was so compelling to me and so interesting to me was to study Gaza. Gaza, it's like all of the things that we are seeing in urban areas in the United States, in large swaths of the colonized world, happen in Gaza in this highly concentrated, very sort of microcosm way. Gaza is so tiny, and in some ways is so sort of clearly the political expression of all of these policies that we're. And what's thrilling to me, going back to Shireen's question at the very beginning, while I burn my potatoes, is that I feel like there's a kind of a coming together and a recognition of those different situations. Like 10 years ago, trying to associate what was happening in Gaza in terms of health issues arising, what's the word? Endemic anemia, diabetes, all of these sort of nutrition-related issues, talking about that and what it means to be dependent on international humanitarian food aid, and trying to compare it to what's happening in like American cities, and looking at Native American populations, Black American populations, et cetera. That was a real stretch. Like nobody wanted to go there. Nobody felt ready to go there 10 years ago. And now I feel like those connections are exploding, and that finally we're sort of making those links. And that I think has been really, really exciting to both Laila and I, to see that this is not just a Palestine thing. Like this is very much a Palestine thing. It's very much a Gaza issue, but it's not just that. It doesn't end there. It's in some ways like a mirror or a concentrated petri dish image of issues that are taking place all over the world, and the undermining and the stripping of peasant populations of access to their own land, the imposition of a sort of pesticide and a cash crop regime, the dietary and health issues that arise from being fed really shitty food aid. Like they're doing their best, but at the end of the day, it's white flour, sugar, canola oil. It adds up to calories. Like it'll keep you alive, but it won't keep you healthy. It won't keep you prospering. It won't keep your cultural intact. And it certainly won't keep the relationship to the land and the territory alive. And so seeing the sort of strategic use of this alienation of people from land, from food traditions, from agricultural traditions. We can go on and on about how, the mechanisms historically by which that's exercised. But I think anyone working on either peasant issues or like urban health issues will very quickly recognize very similar things happening in Gaza. Just in Gaza, they're happening in this sort of like microscopic petri dish where it becomes, I think, much easier to study them and identify them than it might be in a broader, more metropolitan space. So now I'm going to pull the potatoes. They're all very golden and not too crispy, but slightly golden now. Sorry to leave you, but otherwise they burned.
I tend to put my veggies in the oven because then you don't need to worry about them until the timer goes off.
Yes, that would have been a much better idea.
No, that was not intended to correct. I'm just describing my laziness. I just sort of.
No, I think that's both more healthful and much easier to make compatible with talking about everything. Anyway, now I've got a big heap of fried potatoes and eggplants, and I'm going to proceed to shred the eggplants and cover them and juice a couple more lemons. Now add the juice of a couple of lemons, depending how juicy and how large your lemons are, to this pepper and, you can't see it, this pepper and crushed garlic mix. And just kind of spoon that around a little bit. So yeah, in terms of the changes in the discourse over the last 10 years since we've been kind of in this, talking about this book and writing this book and then talking to people about it, has been enormous. And I think very, very, source of much optimism and excitement for us. That on the one hand, there's been an explosion of writing and talking about Palestinian cuisine that really didn't exist 10 years ago. I mean, I'm sure many of you have seen lots and lots of cookbooks coming out, a kind of visibility, the emergence of restaurants that explicitly name themselves as Palestinian. Like before, we were seeing lots of Mediterranean restaurants, maybe Middle Eastern restaurants, but very few, especially in the United States, that dared to put the name Palestine on what they were doing. And that step is being taken, that name is circulating in the public, not in a like do I dare and do I dare kind of way, but really verbally, vocally, and outspokenly, which is very heartening for us. And it's very exciting to see this explosion of cookbooks. I think ours is quite different from most because it's very much about home cooks. It's we call it kitchen anthropology. Like it's not restaurant food. It's not, nouveau cuisine of any kind. It's very much the idea is like document real people in their homes making the delicious, traditional, sometimes imperfect, but very authentic foods that they do make, because from the beginning it's a cookbook, but it's a cookbook in part, not exclusively, but in part as a pretext to talk about a lot of other things. So we're passionate about the food and the cooking, but also it's serving us as a sort of a Trojan horse to get in the door with a conversation about a lot of other things. I'm going to arrange my vegetables.
Food is also such a unifier, food just, it's one of the most basic things we have in common. So it just naturally unifies, kind of in that way. It's a wonderful, enjoyable, stealthy.
It does. It's also, I mean, Laila and I have spent a lot of time talking and sort of laughing about like, what do we do about what we have come to call the hummus kumbaya discourse of like, we all love hummus, we all get along, what's the problem? Like, and sort of the expectation that the fact that we all love the food is sort of a shortcut to resolving issues. And And while I think it really is important in this whole sort of notion of like, let's break bread together, let's share each other's histories and flavors and approach each other, and that's indeed, I think, very, very, very important and very powerful as a place to begin a conversation. It doesn't end the conversation. Like the material on the ground, actual expulsion and I'm sorry, I'm
Injustices.
totally failing me
Injustices,
today.
really.
But there's a real material burglary of land and heritage that can't be elided just because we all like the food. So it's a sort of a push me, pull you. It's trying to do both at the same time. Like, yes, let's sit down, let's break bread together, let's feel the sort of unifying power of food, but let's not mistake that for a solution. Like, that's the beginning of a conversation. It's not the end of the conversation. So, and we have seen a lot of situations in which there's this sort of like false conclusion drawn of like, now we're all friends. It's like, there was never a problem about friendship. Like, that's not the issue. The issue is a very material one about expropriation of land, about expropriation of livelihood, and so friendship is not the issue.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, you kind of touched on like the cultural appropriation of food, because a lot of Palestinian dishes are passed off incorrectly named as Israeli dishes, like shakshuki, falafel, hummus, all of it. Have you guys come up against, have you gotten any pushback on any of your dishes? Like, how do you deal with that? Talk about that a little bit. I don't know if people are familiar with the cultural appropriation of Palestinian food.
Laila, do you want to speak to that a little, or shall I?
Sorry. Yes. Yeah, I mean, Maggie basically, touched on it a bit, but we always like to say that it has a lot to do with the context and, the intention, and, others have identified or, highlighted the differences between cultural diffusion versus cultural appropriation, and where one draws the line. And, if the context and the intention is one of colonization and settler colonialism, and one where the idea is to use food as a means to further control over a land or a people or a culture, then for us it becomes appropriation. But if it's in a context or climate where that is not the case, and it isn't sort of an extension of a power grab or control or whatever, then it's more of like sort of natural cultural diffusion, as you would see maybe elsewhere. So I think the good news is that I feel personally over the past 10 years that discourse on this has sort of changed, and people are more aware than they were before. Even I find a lot in sort of mainstream magazines and things like that, whereas it would have been much more common, and it still happens, but I feel like it's not as common now to find these magazines just simply completely erasing Palestinian identity and food. And they are a little bit more now keen to be able to highlight that or learn about the differences or whatever. But it is important. I mean, it's something that irks people tremendously, especially when it has to do with things that are very clearly, and again, we always draw the line with like it's not really about ownership of certain things, but again, it's about the context and the intent, right? Many dishes are, common across the Levant, and many dishes, under the Ottoman Empire were extensively, cooked and borrowed. And you see that as I'm here in Turkey, I see that very clearly. So there's a distinction there to be made, is in that sense. But it's also very clear in the Israeli context that many dishes were, especially in the early days of the foundation of the state of Israel were Yusuf, I can't hear, were appropriated to be able to put, as they would say, roots in the ground and to be able to adopt the local culture. Although I know some Israeli food scholars would disagree with this, but to put roots in the ground and to be able to, accept one part of the other and reject the rest, right? So accept the culture and the food and adopt it as your own, but reject the local inhabitants.
And I think part of what we really enjoyed about doing the research is precisely thinking about the fluidity and like the rates of change of culture. Like national borders can get drawn in one conference. You can sit down and you can draw a line through the world and suddenly border. Food works at an entirely different rhythm. And so food, if you take the time and you learn how to listen to it, like it can tell us of stories, of contacts, of neighborly relationships, of exchange, of that don't follow political borders, that don't follow. And, for us, it's important, for me, it's very important to understand this writing about food as writing from a below the sort of discursive level of nations and political state building in a largely feminine space, in a space inhabited principally by women, in which things grow and change depending upon the availability of new ingredients. You have a neighbor, you exchange, holiday dishes with each other. Like people's cooking does evolve. It's not fixed into some national ideal. It evolves, it changes, and that's really important. Like that's the essence of what we're getting at. We're looking at Armenian influences and influences that come in from the Gulf and influences that that's the idea that food is not a national manifesto. It's a sort of ongoing conversation with your neighbors, I think is very, very important. But one thing is an ongoing conversation with your neighbors, and another altogether is like then marketing it. Like when something makes a leap from the neighborliness of I make your food, you make my food, we share, to like, I will now brand this, I will market it, and I will turn it into a highly profitable sort of strategic and economic bid for hegemony over it. No, like if I made my neighbor's famous cake and I suddenly went to town and started selling it and saying it was mine, like she would be rightly offended. Like that's her thing. It's no problem that I get her recipe. It's a problem when I suddenly turn it into like Maggie's fantastic cake. It's obnoxious. So so I think understanding that it's not about whose food is it, it's about what are they doing with it and what purposes does it serve geopolitically, economically, and in terms of the sort of soft politics, the soft power of the symbolic of food, and so there I think there's a lot of work to be done and a lot to be discussed. But we do have to kind of tiptoe through things. Like a few years ago, we were invited to give a talk at the Metropolitan Museum with Yotam Montalenghi, which was an honor. We really admire him. He's been an amazing support for us. Like when this book first came out, we were kind of like this little nobody and this little minor just started publishing house. And he really opened a lot of doors for us and said, like, look at this is important. And we're really grateful to him for that. And I think he really treats this issue with great sensitivity, but it was kind of a question for us, like, what are we doing by going and giving a talk about Jerusalem food with him in, like, what does that mean? And ultimately we decided it was a very much a worthwhile thing to do. But I do think you have to think at each invitation, at each moment, like, what does it mean? What purpose is it serving? Is it something that's productive and useful for us, or is it something that could lead to a appropriation? But I think everywhere that you can actually tell stories and talk about what's going on is an opportunity and an opening, really.
Sure.
Commodity, yes, Asya, that's exactly the word I was looking for. I was stumbling around trying to come up with it. Thanks.
A quick question. My aubergines are like really hard, so it's gonna be a while before I can put my fingers on them to rend them. I'm gonna have to cool them
And
down.
you don't need to, by the way, you can just leave them as is or use a
No, but
fork.
it's nice when they're tender. You want them like, I will show you my plate of rent. I have not yet put the dressing on them, but this is shredded eggplant with potatoes. It even looks a little bit like a fish. When we started out, I said that this dish is called widow's fish. It's the sort of poor man's version of fish. And
Did you dress it yet, Maggie? Or
I have not yet dressed it. I don't want it to get soggy while we're talking, but I will go ahead and dress it now. I now have this sort of liquidy, sort of chunky liquidy dressing that is principally lemon juice with crushed up garlic and green peppers in it.
I was gonna say, I thought if memory serves, they usually do it when it's hot so that it absorbs the dressing, right?
That's probably.
But maybe I could be wrong. I don't know.
So it's on a plate rather than a salad bowl. You recommend a plate?
Yes. It's served on a flat plate.
Oh, okay. Let me do that before I mess it up. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
You're right, and this was poured over hot, but a person can only do so many things at a time.
No, it's fine. It looks delicious.
I'm suspecting my stepmother and I will eat this all ourselves. I don't think anyone else tolerates that much raw garlic.
I'm just conscious of time. We're almost at 8:15 or 3:15, depending where you are, or something else. Do we have any other questions from anybody who's attending? Emel, who's the amazing wizard behind the scenes, and a big shout out and thank you to you, Emel, for like helping put this together and running the Zoom and everything. Emel's just put the links in the chat for the 3rd edition for the UK and the US, for the 3rd edition of the book. And I have to say, like, we grew up eating Arabic food at home, and this book has been such a pleasure. Just, it feels like getting to visit Gaza, which I hope that I'm able to do at some point in my life, and understanding Palestinian food beyond the geolocations that my family is from, because we are so segmented as a society, like between diaspora, 48, Gaza, West, like, we don't have access to each other and our own history. So it's really wonderful in that way too. And trying out the dishes that I know, but like a different variation, and then seeing how they're made in Gaza and trying them that way. It's been really wonderful. So
thank you. That was precisely the objective, was to be able to sort of take people on a journey into Gaza. Someone was asking David what book this was. Yeah, this is this is, just as a reminder, the Gaza Kitchen, a Palestinian culinary journey. So it was specific to the broader Gaza area, but predating 1948. So the area beyond the modern day Gaza Strip, the villages and towns that existed, that many of which were ethnically cleansed, and from which Palestinians fled into what would become modern day Gaza. So again, it is called the Gaza Kitchen, kind of, if you're going to regionalize it, Southwest Palestinian cuisine, I would say. Wow, I love everyone's picture. It looks amazing. Yeah. And somebody was also asking what's a favorite dish in Gaza, and it really largely depends on what area in Gaza you are in and what your background is. If you happen to be from a sort of villager / farming background from some of those villages I was talking about, then you would more likely be preferential to dishes like kishik, things that are made with, the fermented dairy and grain type dishes. If you were from the city, then definitely dagga, sumagia, which is a lamb and chard and sumac stew that's actually made around this time, around the Muslim holiday of Eid, is a favorite in the city. And then dagga, of course, that we made today is sort of everyone's favorite, I would say.
I think referring to what you were saying, Shireen, it's another aspect of this book that was really important for us was to provide this portrait of Gaza and allow, and in the hopes that that would serve sort of to connect, because and that's, again, going back to your question of like, what's different 10 years ago and now, like just now in this recent uprising, like we've seen this coordinated effort from all of the different highly segmented realities of Palestine and its diaspora actually really coming together in a meaningfully political way. And that's enormously, inspiring and hopeful for all of us also. And our hope at the time was also to get, like, Gaza had been so completely isolated, so totally disconnected, and the sort of geopolitical strategy of making Gaza this like no-go, don't touch zone that even Palestinians in the West Bank or in the 48 lands didn't know anything about, didn't have any access to, and didn't and sort of it was increasingly not on their map of what is Palestine. Like, it was very important for us to sort of draw Gaza back into the conversation to the extent that, to the very modest extent that we could with a cookbook. Like, the hope was to give each other access to the sensation of sitting down at a dinner table and being familiar with people on the other side of that fortified border. So thank you for your comment, and that's very much what we were hoping for.
I'm really happy to hear that. Laila, I know you have to go. I just want to just grab you for 1 second. Asya had a question. We have a lot of vegetarians who are in attendance. Can you use meat substitute for some of the meat dishes, or is that just like?
Most of the meat dishes don't really require meat. Like, this is not a population that's eating, occasionally for a holiday, for a festive occasion, for a wedding, people will roast a lamb or do some large piece of meat. But for the most part, meat is at the very most like lending a little bit of flavor, adding a little bit of prestige. And really, if you don't use it, there's almost no sort of some loss to the dish. In fact, personally, doing the kitchen testing, there are the dishes that I really prefer without meat.
Yeah, almost everything can be made without. Yeah, everything can be made without. I have known people, my niece is a vegetarian. She's used like, beyond substitute for certain things, or, for mahshi or whatever, when she's making stuffed vegetables, she's used that. I've known people to use like mushrooms instead of chicken in maqluba. I know for people who are gluten-free, I've made gluten-free maftool before. I know people who, will substitute quinoa. So most certainly, the only thing I would say that's like meat dependent.
Instead of using a meat broth, you use a vegetable broth, and it's fine.
Exactly. It's very, very easily. Yes, I agree. Yeah.
And I think we state that throughout the book, like, there's a meat option, or if you want to do this without the meat, just use a vegetable broth.
And in fact, in the new book, we state that more emphatically. Kind of, we added areas, we highlighted where you could make like these kinds of substitutions and how. So,
and it's even pretty sort of ethnographically consistent with what's going on in Gaza, because no one can afford meat anyway. So people are perforce, whether they prefer to be or not, being forced into vegetarianism. And the substitutions anyway, so really consistent with actual
very true
there.
Yeah, for sure.
Huge thank
All
you,
right,
both of you. Laila, go to sleep. Enjoy the rest of your night.
Oh wow, that looks beautiful, Maggie.
I'll share mine.
Take a picture. Wait, show me again, Maggie. Show me again. Nice. Maggie, show yours again so I can do a screenshot.
It's on.
I say yours look beautiful too.
Gorgeous.
I got distracted eating the salad and gave up on the eggplant. Thank you so much.
All right, see you guys.
Everyone for attending. Pick up the book, it's wonderful. And
yes, please do buy it, gift it, share it, cook from it, Yeah. All right.
Hope we can do this again.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.